The victims of these experiments, primarily Jewish people, Roma, political prisoners, and those deemed undesirable, were subjected to unimaginable suffering. Procedures ranged from forced sterilization and twin studies to exposure to extreme temperatures and infectious diseases. The goal was often to test the limits of human endurance and develop methods for the German military, with no regard for the lives or well-being of the subjects. The psychological trauma inflicted was immeasurable, compounding the physical agony. The legacy of these experiments serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the absolute necessity of upholding ethical standards. In scientific research, the quest for knowledge must never justify the deliberate infliction of pain and suffering. The role of Nazi doctors. Nazi doctors played a crucial role in executing the eugenics and racial purity policies of the Third Reich. The Nazi ideology promoted the idea of an Aryan master race, leading to the persecution of Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals, and other marginalized groups. The doctors, instead of upholding the Hippocratic oath to do no harm, became instruments of genocide and scientific atrocities. Many doctors involved in these experiments were members of the SS and operated with complete disregard for human life. The most notorious of them was Dr. Joseph Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, who performed horrifying experiments on prisoners, particularly twins. Types of experiments conducted. The experiments conducted by Nazi doctors can be classified into three main categories. 1. Survival and military experiments. The Nazis sought to enhance their soldiers' survival in extreme conditions, leading to brutal tests on camp prisoners. Hypothermia experiments, conducted primarily at Dachau concentration camp. Prisoners were submerged in ice-cold water or left in freezing temperatures to study the effects of hypothermia. The goal was to develop better survival techniques for German soldiers fighting in cold climates. Most subjects died from exposure, and those who survived were often subjected to rewarming experiments that caused excruciating pain. High-altitude experiments. These tests, also at Dachau, aimed to study the effects of high altitudes on pilots. Prisoners were placed in low-pressure chambers that simulated conditions at 65,000 feet. Many subjects lost consciousness, suffered brain damage, or died from decompression sickness. Seawater experiments. Conducted at Dachau, these experiments forced prisoners to drink only seawater to test survival methods. Victims suffered from severe dehydration, hallucinations, and organ failure. 2. Medical and pharmaceutical experiments. Nazi doctors used prisoners as human guinea pigs to test drugs, vaccines, and medical treatments. Malaria experiments. Conducted at Dachau and other camps, prisoners were deliberately infected with malaria and given untested treatments. Many died or suffered permanent health issues. Mustard gas experiments. Victims were exposed to mustard gas and their burns were studied to find treatment methods. Instead of alleviating suffering, these experiments caused immense pain, disfigurement, and death. Tuberculosis experiments. At Neuengamme concentration camp, children were infected with tuberculosis to study potential treatments. Most of the children suffered agonizing deaths. Bone, muscle, and nerve transplantation experiments. Conducted at Ravensbrück, prisoners underwent forced amputations and mutilations to test surgical procedures. Many victims suffered extreme pain, infections, and death. 3. Genetic and racial experiments. Under the Nazi ideology of racial superiority, experiments were conducted to study genetics, human endurance, and racial characteristics. Twin experiments. Led by Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz, experiments on twins involved injecting chemicals into their eyes to try to change eye color, amputating limbs to compare healing rates, and sewing twins together in an attempt to create conjoined siblings. Many of these children suffered excruciating pain and died. Sterilization experiments. Nazi doctors sought ways to sterilize populations they deemed inferior. Victims were subjected to radiation, caustic chemicals, and brutal surgeries without anesthesia. Artificial insemination and birth experiments. Some doctors attempted to artificially inseminate women with animal sperm or other inhumane methods to study reproduction. Notorious Nazi doctors and their crimes. Dr. Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, known for his grotesque twin experiments at Auschwitz. Mengele's work was some of the most infamous. Despite his heinous crimes, he evaded capture and lived in South America until his death in 1979. Dr. Karl Klauberg conducted sterilization experiments on women in Auschwitz, often using chemical injections that led to unbearable pain and death. Dr. Sigmund Rascher, responsible for hypothermia and high-altitude experiments, Rascher personally oversaw the suffering and deaths of many victims at Dachau. Dr. Aribert Heim, Dr. Death, known for injecting gasoline and toxic substances directly into victims' hearts at Mauthausen. The Nuremberg trials and justice. After the war, many Nazi doctors were held accountable during the Nuremberg trials. Specifically in the doctors' trial, 1946 to 1947. 23 doctors and medical officials were tried. 7 were sentenced to death. 7 received prison sentences. 7 were acquitted. The Nuremberg Code emerged from these trials, establishing ethical principles for medical research, emphasizing voluntary consent, and prohibiting inhumane experimentation. Legacy and ethical implications. The atrocities committed by Nazi doctors left an enduring impact on medical ethics. Nuremberg Code laid the foundation for modern bioethics, ensuring that no human should be subjected to experiments without informed consent. Despite these guidelines, ethical violations in medical research have continued in various forms worldwide. The horror of these experiments serves as a grim reminder of what happens when medicine is weaponized for political and ideological purposes. Museums, historical accounts, and survivor testimonies continue to educate the world on these atrocities to ensure they are never repeated. Conclusion. The systematic nature of these experiments, sanctioned by the highest levels of the Nazi regime, underscores the chilling potential for organized evil. Meticulous record-keeping, ironically intended to document scientific progress, became a testament to the calculated cruelty inflicted upon defenseless individuals. The aftermath of these atrocities saw the Nuremberg trials, where some of the responsible doctors were brought to justice, though many escaped accountability. These trials established the Nuremberg Code, a set of ethical principles for human experimentation, a direct response to the horrors witnessed. However, the ethical questions raised by these experiments continue to resonate today. The debate regarding the use of data obtained from these unethical studies remains a complex issue, forcing us to grapple with the tension between scientific advancement and moral integrity. The enduring impact of these experiments lies not only in the physical and psychological scars left on the survivors but also in the profound ethical dilemmas they present. We are compelled to reflect on the fragility of human dignity and the critical role of vigilance in safeguarding against future atrocities. The memory of these victims must serve as a constant reminder of the imperative to uphold the sanctity of human life and the inviolable principles of ethical research.